Today, you will meet Robin Hopkins. She is a fantastic person and she's so accomplished. She's an actress, she's a podcast host, she's an author, she's done so many things. So, I'll tell you a little bit. She wrote a book called If These Ovaries Could Talk, which was made after a podcast that she co hosted. And she won many, many, many awards and accolades from people like Rosie O'Donnell and Amy Schumer. And now she has her own podcast called Well Adjusting, and she'll probably make a book about that too. I will keep you posted. And she's also the producer and the director and the host of the Headspace podcast. So here's a woman who's done many, many things. Her most important role is being a mom. She and her wife have two beautiful children who they conceived with the help of two sperm donors. And she will take us on her journey to have her children, but also share with us some of the most inspiring things that you can imagine about how she pursued this, how she decided to choose her donors, how she went through so many decisions that so many of us grapple with every day, and how ultimately she is helping her children feel good in their own skin. And that's what we all want, right? We want to be a family where our children feel good in their own skin and feel close to us and good about their story, about being donor conceived. So she's going to teach us a lot, and I hope you take a pad of paper and a pen because there's lots of notes to take here. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Welcome to Building Your Family. This is a podcast about donor conception, surrogacy, and all the ways the modern family is built. I'm Lisa Schumann. I'm your host. I'm an author, a researcher, a therapist, and I'm passionate about helping people have a better path to parenthood and an easier parenting experience. And to that end, today I have a special guest, Robin Hopkins, who is also a friend of mine who's done wonderful things with her life. She's done podcasts and books and is about to embark on another book writing experience, which she can tell us about. But she was the former host of If These Ovaries Could Talk, which was a great podcast that I was on. And she wrote this book, which I encourage everybody to get. She's a co-author with Jamie Kelton, who has a podcast herself. And she had so many accolades. She won awards for the book, and Amy Schumer said she loved the book, and she had Rosie O'Donnell on the show. She's had so many wonderful experiences. And now she's the host of two podcasts. One is for Headspace, and one is her own podcast, which she will talk to you about, and is really a fantastic self-help podcast that I think everybody could get a lot out of. But today we are going to focus on family building. So welcome, Robin. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate having you.
Thanks for having me. Although I feel like we should just end right there because it's probably not going to get better than all that you just said. So I'm only going to disappoint from this point forward.
No.
So it's great to be here, though.
Well, thank you. And so tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing these days and the podcast that you're working on.
Yeah. I'm an actor. I'm a writer. I'm a producer. I'm in Brooklyn, so you'll probably hear some sirens as we go, which will be fun. Like you mentioned, I host a podcast called Dear Headspace, which I really love. But I also host a podcast that's very near and dear to my heart called Well Adjusting. And we talk to people, a lot of times Gen Zers and millennials about self-help, finances, the workplace, just kind of like I'm like that kind of fun aunt that might bring cocktails and be like, and tell you what you really need to hear. So we try to like pick problems apart with people and hopefully give them a little bit of like a direction. And then I also have a Substack that is very connected to the podcast, and it's called Shit I Learned from My Crappy Childhood. And I do kind of weekly essays or stories, and I'm just talking about, kind of like any self-help advice I have comes from all the crap that I went through and just what I learned as I came through on the other side. I'm kind of like a very DIY self-helper is how I like to say it. I'm not so much with the accreditations, but I've got the life skills. And as you mentioned, I'm working on a book proposal based on the same idea. So I got like 400 jobs and only one of them pays. That's what I like to say.
We want to hear all about that, but I would really like to hear also for our listeners, hear a little bit about how you built your family, because that's part of this whole process, right? And part of
Yeah.
why you had the former podcast and part of why you wrote this book and how you got to where you are now living, as we were talking about, the life where, everybody is dying to get to, where the kids are yelling at you for not getting,
Yeah.
the newest technology. But it was a bit of a road, but you got there. Would
Yeah.
you mind sharing with people a little bit about that journey, and then also maybe a little bit about how your kids experience, because people always want to know, what are their experiences for kids? How do they feel about their donor? How do they feel about the life that they've, kind of been brought into? What is their experience of being donor conceived, and all of that, and your experiences with raising your children?
Well, geez, that's a big question. I'll just start with the family. It's my wife Mary and I knew I wanted to just have kids, and I had to kind of bring her along on the journey a little bit. I think she just a lesbian from the '90s didn't think that was even an issue. And
Mm.
what's interesting is I met you on my journey to create my family. I believe you were the staff therapist that we were required to meet with, because initially what we were going to do, Mary's a little older than I am, so we were going to use my eggs and Mary was going to carry. Like, we were just so enamored with that idea, because we were like, wow, like this is like, it'll be like the blueprint and the DNA and the map for me, but like the bones will literally be created from Mary. And we were like, that's like as close as we can get to making a baby together. And we just absolutely loved that idea. And then we got to the point where, like, we had met you, I had a checklist, of course, because I'm big into my spreadsheets and my checklists. And we had everything. We got to the point where we had all the prescriptions like laid out on a coffee table, and all we had to do was order them, and we were going to start. And it was actually Mary that said this, because I don't think that if I had said it, I think that would have been bad or wrong. And I wasn't, I think I kind of felt this way, but I don't know that I had acknowledged it. But she said, are we doing this the hardest possible way? And because the way our insurance was, we had enough money to really just kind of do it one time.
Mm.
And, I don't think we had enough information to know that, like, yeah, like there'd be one retrieval and there might be more implantations that we could do. But we were just like, we got like one shot and we've got like a 40% chance of 40%. We were like, that, Mary was like, I'm not great at math, but that doesn't seem awesome. And I was kind of like, well, and she said, I think maybe we started down this road because I was afraid I wasn't going to feel involved, because she was always afraid she was going to be like that dad who's just like holding the diaper bag in the back.
Mm.
And she just wanted to
Wow.
feel connected. And she said, I don't know that I feel that way anymore. And immediately, like, called and said, we're going to do it a different way. I think my cycle started like a week later, and we did IUI, and I got pregnant. I miscarried that baby, but it was like we immediately just took a right turn. And then we were like back in the donor search again, because I miscarried, and then we ran out of sperm, and then the guy was out of the program, and we were just like, oh my God. And it was like in the beginning stages, there was so much, like, everything felt so weighted. It was like, how do we pick this person? Who do we pick? And like, it was like we were approaching it like it was a dating app. We were like, I
Mm.
don't know, he sounds not fun.
Mhm.
Like, we were like, his voice is weird.
Mhm.
And then we had to pick a new donor. We went through the agonizing thing again. And then a couple times later, I got pregnant with my first kid. Just like IUI, no, non-medicated, which means
Wow.
basically the doctor just kind of puts it in there.
Yeah.
Just sticks it in there
Yeah.
and talks to you very uncomfortably while he's doing it. And you're like, that's romantic. Um,
Yeah.
so it was like it was an interesting journey in that we just really had something in mind, and we were very attached to it in some ways. And then we had to kind of let that go in order to be like, okay, here. And Mary had a lot of work to do, because she, like, genetically is not connected to the kids. And, I get that. I can understand where you might have to process that a little bit.
And how did she make peace with that eventually? How was she able to get through that?
That's a good question. I would say not in 1 minute, like, kind of over time.
Mhm.
I think that, like, initially we were like, all right, well, since I'm like, I get to, I'm using air quotes, because I don't think being pregnant is fun in any way, shape, or form, but I'm getting to be the one to have the babies. So we gave the kids her last name. Both kids have my last name as a middle name, because I'm not down with the hyphenates. No offense to hyphenators around the world. It's just like too much. So we started there. And then I just think like, there was during the pregnancy, I think there was I think she had a bigger concern with feeling connected. Like, will I feel connected to this baby? And I remember the second that Maxine came out, I just made like a shooting out hand with motion, which is kind of hilarious. The minute she came out, I watched Mary, like I was just like, what is happening? And and I watched Mary like just running through the room with like two cameras, sobbing and taking pictures. And I was like, okay, there's nothing for us to be concerned about. So I just,
Mm,
once the baby got there, there was no thing. You know what I mean? It was like she was so in love that it was like,
it all went away.
yeah, I think so.
That's beautiful. That's really
Yeah.
beautiful. So nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's such a hard process, and what I think is so interesting is my kids are now about to turn 13 and 15. So it's like I'm looking back on something that's like, oh, but at the time it feels so weighted, right? It feels
Yes.
so like every decision you make is life or death, like am I going to give my kid this or am I going to give my kid that? But the reality of it is that I just wanted to be a parent and it didn't matter. I mean, I say all that, but we went to the ends of the earth to try to have our kid be by the same donor, our second
Mhm.
kid, because again, our first donor was out of the program. And at the time, I didn't know you could buy them out of retirement or attempt to. And so I joined like the sibling registry through the sperm bank and found a couple of people who had leftover sperm. And one of them was in Bogota, Colombia. And she was like, I have a vial if you want it. And we were
Wow.
doing all this stuff trying to get it shipped. And it was just proving like,
Oh my
like
gosh.
the panic of like just picturing some like idiot in customs being like, what's this? And opening it and then it just being like, "Brr, brr, brr, brr." As it slowly melts. Like
Oh
my
my
second
gosh.
kid is melting. so like the pressure and I remember this woman, she said, well, why don't we just move the mountain to Muhammad? She said, what, how is it like move the mountain to Muhammad? And I was like, she was like, come here. She said, you could see my doctor. And I had a flight voucher and we did it. I just hopped on a
What?
plane. I went down there, saw her doctor. We did an insemination. It
Oh
was
my gosh.
a journey because I spoke barely any Spanish. And I was just wandering around Colombia for 7 days because we just booked a large window of time. I'm hanging out with a woman who has a child also by like that's a donor sibling to my oldest kid. And I'm meeting this kid and I'm in another country.
Wow.
I don't speak the language and like I was sitting in the lobby with her before I went in for the insemination and she was like holding my hand and she was like, I'm with you. And I was like, this is like, what an incredibly lovely experience. And what's interesting is that didn't work. Probably I put weight pressure on it. And I think I'm circling back to my original point, which as I often do. And then a woman from Seattle, another donor, I don't know what to call the other moms, but another mom who had a baby by the same donor. She had a vial, she sent it to me, and that didn't work. And there was only one other woman in Australia. And I was like, I'm not going to Australia. Like, this is insane.
Wow.
And that moment was the moment where I don't know if Mary said it or I said it, but we were like, I was obsessed with making sure my kids were 100% genetically, I didn't like
Connected.
the idea that they would technically be half siblings. And we were both kind of like, but you're not in any way biologically related to the kids. And are we saying you're not their mom? This
Mhm.
is so crazy. Like, what are we doing? And we got a new donor, got pregnant the first time. And so it's just
Wow.
like I really have such a strong faith in the universe gave me the exact kids I was supposed to have. And I got all these lessons along the way as we were doing it.
Wow. What a story. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
I crunched
Robin.
a lot into a 2-minute monologue there. Sorry.
No, that's amazing. What a story. I think it's so interesting because, yes, a lot of people feel like they want to use the same donor for all of their children. And I think, it's nice in some ways for the children to be genetically connected. But the other piece, which we learned from a researcher we had on previously who studies donor siblings, she said another piece of it is that kids also just appreciate knowing other kids who are donor conceived.
Yeah.
Like that's another part of it, not even just that they're related, but that there's somebody else who's donor conceived that they can relate to. And that by itself is also kind of a nice
Yeah,
experience for
for
them.
sure. That's something you and I've talked a lot about, for sure. And it's
Yeah.
something that's been really important in our family building journey because, what's interesting is when I started off, I was very much like 180 degrees different than where I sit today. Like I was, no, I don't want anything to do with those folks like that. Like they're not my family. Mary
Mm-hmm.
is my family. We only went to this bank because we needed this part. And I was almost resentful the idea that I needed to do that. But it was like, it
Yeah.
was a necessity. We did it. And at that time, I wasn't thinking about my kids and the impact of it. Like it didn't, I wouldn't say it didn't
Doesn't
occur to
occur to
me, but
you.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
it didn't occur to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, it wasn't as big of a conversation, I think, as it is now. Right.
That's true.
And it was probably in the adopted community, but less so in donor conceived kids.
Mm-hmm.
But the need, again, talking about the universe giving me exactly what I needed, the need to try to get the sperm from the first donor when I joined. When I joined that, like, if anyone's not familiar, oftentimes, at least my sperm bank, when you report the pregnancy, they give you a login for a board that anyone who's had a kid by the same donor can log into, so that they're creating like a little portal where you all can chat, so that there's a relationship. And so I had friends who had secret Facebook groups with their donors. So I had that idea, and I went in and I said, "Is anybody in here have any more sperm?" And this one woman was like, "I don't, but we're family. Yay." And I was so freaked out. Like
Mm.
I was like, "I don't, we're not family. Please stop it." I was like, "I don't know who you are." And then the other woman came in, and so I started chatting with them. But in the chatting with them, I was like, "God, these women are so lovely." Like, and we have this thing in common. And I had remembered about the friend in the Facebook group. So I just went into the donor board and I posted, I said, "This is my stuff on Facebook. I've created
Mhm.
this secret Facebook group. Go here, friend me, and I'll let you in." And all these people came in, and and there was someone in Australia and someone here, and everyone started sharing pictures. And over time it just changed my whole perspective about like the value of having this community, not just for me, but definitely for my kids. And there
Mhm.
was like a period of time where both of my kids have been completely different with their relationship to it. But my daughter was like really interested in donor siblings. And oddly enough, like there's been so many weird little like twists and turns in our story. But we found out that she had a donor sibling that we lived 2 blocks away from each other in Brooklyn for 2 years, for the first 2 years of
Wow.
her life. And we met when they were about probably in 3rd grade. And today, and we're talking in all of Brooklyn, all of New York City, they go to the same high school, and they go, and the donor sibling knows, like when my daughter was in middle school, she knew some of her friends. They're not
Wow.
necessarily like pals, but they know each other. And I think that's really weird and interesting. And we met another donor sibling around Christmas. So like we kind of have a relationship where they're like distant cousins,
Mhm.
like
Oh.
if they come to
Mhm.
town, I'm happy to go get pizza with you, or you can come over and, but
Right.
I'm not vacationing with these folks,
Right.
because I don't know them in that way.
Yeah. Like what you just pointed out, you said your daughter knows this person in high school, but they're not like best friends. And, this researcher we had on, she said that, a lot of these donor sibling relationships that start where the parents have this strong intention of connecting the kids, even when they really want to do that when they're young. Sometimes when the kids get older, they think, you know what, maybe you're not my cup of tea.
Yeah,
And, maybe you are, maybe you're not. Maybe that person would be my best friend otherwise, but maybe not. Right.
yeah,
And so, just like any other relationship we have with relatives, some we like, some we don't, it's going to be the same sort of
exactly.
thing. Right.
Exactly. To me, we put the information in front of them, and then they can do what they will with it. My son has
Right.
had, I mean, we let them lead the conversation. Like we started off kind of, and this is something we talked to you a lot about and that you were very helpful with. We started off with age appropriate information. We started off with like a book, and we've added on about their story, like at age appropriate levels, kind of just adding a little more information each time. And if they asked, and he doesn't really show any interest in really any of it. But what's interesting is his side, I have the most information about, because one of the there's the one woman, I set up a Facebook group for his donor as well. And there's this one woman who really kind of like took it over and just took charge. And I was like, oh, please have at it. And she swabbed her kids because she had twins. Not only was the donor registered with like a 23andMe type thing, she knew him and went to
Well,
college with him. This is the only part that's a little funky, is like kind of like, I want to say like without our consent feels way too strong, but she just like without thinking, I think she was so excited to share the information, just shared it all, shared his name, shared a picture. And I was just like, oh my God, because I was not ready, right? Like I
there's
thought,
a lot.
yeah, I thought, hey, this is when my kid's 18, they'll decide and then we'll go to the bank, like, because we chose an open donor. And like when my kid was 9, all of a sudden I have all this information and I'm looking at this donor and there's just something, because at the time that we were doing it, you got a baby picture. You had to do a lot of mental gymnastics to try to figure out who your donor was and try
Is
to,
it
you
so
just,
different?
yeah, and just to see the face, it was an adjustment for me even. And so she was going to invite him into the group and we were all, I just kind of was like, hey, like I don't want to speak for the other families. I was like, but I'm not ready. We're not ready. We're letting our son lead, and can we keep this group for us? I said, because it's just, and then she reached out to him on behalf of all of us, which I was like, oh my God, that could have gone sideways. Thankfully it didn't. They set another group up, and in that group he's in it, and a couple of them have met him and talked to him, and I'm in the group because I just wanted to say thank you to him because he did, his service did help create my family. But fairly recently, maybe last year, my son did ask, and I watched him and I said, okay, well, I said, we know his name, and we told him the name. And then he said, do you have a picture? And I said, we do. I showed him the picture and I watched his face, and his face was kind of like, and it was like, just like a weird kind of like, what face?
Mhm.
And I don't know if it was, I think because he doesn't look anything like him. He looks just like me.
Oh,
And
uh-huh.
and I could tell that he was done. And he goes, okay, hasn't asked a question since.
So your son saw the picture and then he said that was it, kind of. He felt like
Yeah, it seemed
it was
like
enough.
it was enough information for him, and I respected that. And then we just went back to like whatever. And I said, if you want more, you have more. And I think there was a point where my daughter asked, and I shared a little bit of what we knew, and then she said, okay, that's enough. Because I said, we have an audio file. Do you want to hear that? And she goes, no, I don't think so. And I said, okay, great. It's like I think you just have to let them lead and
Yes.
and follow it. I think the part that's hard to understand is like I've done a couple of on Well Adjusting. I did an interview with a woman who is adopted, and she was struggling to find her heritage because she was raised by this kind of very white family in New Jersey, and her heritage was Colombian, and she felt like equal parts too Latin and not at all Latin enough, and she was really struggling to find herself. And it was like those moments as a parent, just like, oh, they kind of turned me inside out because she was like, my family is lovely. They are my family. But no matter what, she was still left with this thing. And I do think about that at times, that I did make a choice. In order to have them, I made a choice that there'd be something they wouldn't know, or that they would feel different about, or there might be a piece that's missing. And I feel like we did everything that we could to be open and to provide support and to place information around them. And then, just like I feel like every other parenting decision, you have to just sit with that and hope it's enough, because that's going to be part of their journey, or it is part of their journey.
Mhm. Mhm. But I think also what you're raising here, and which I really feel like the audience really needs to hear, probably, you can't hear it enough, is that every child is different, right? And we all
Yes.
need to respect our kids' own process. I run this workshop for donor conceived kids, which we talked about before. And some kids really want all their information. Some kids are not ready. Some kids years later are ready. And some kids don't want to know all of that. So we really need to follow our own kids. I remember when there was a lot of uproar in the donor conceived community to
Yeah.
start with, I guess, years ago about the fact that so many people weren't told, and this uproar on social media about it, and this whole issue about genetic mirroring and how people are so upset that they don't look like their parents. And I remember having these conversations with my kids when they were little, but now that they're older, I said to my daughter, I'm just wondering, do you ever think about that? Because we talked about it when you were little and we did these workshops and
Yeah.
everything. And now that you're kind of grown up, do you ever think about, like, people say, oh, yeah, you look like your mom, or you don't
Yeah.
look like
Yeah.
your mom,
Yeah.
whatever, and this thing. And she goes, Mom, does a fish know he's in water? This is my life. Like, I know I don't look like
Oh,
you. And I've always known I don't look like you. And that's just my life. And I don't care. I love you. And this is just the way our relationship is. Like, we don't look alike at all. It doesn't matter. Like, this is just my life. And this is all I've ever known. So I don't know what it's like to look like you because I've never looked like you. So it doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't know if that's because of her temperament or
yeah.
because of the way that she was always raised. But all of my kids kind of feel like that, and they just assume we don't look alike because that's all they know. So I think
Yeah.
for different kids it's different experience, but certainly if we start at a young age talking to them about their origins and being open with them, we do help them evolve in this way and help them develop the sense of comfort, I think, with just their experience. And everybody's experiences are different, right?
Yeah. And there's also a bit of socialization and maybe like everything would be better over there-ness to this conversation. Because I'll tell you what, my son is my doppelganger, except a boy and more handsome.
Mhm.
And my daughter looks a lot like me, but also way more pretty. And like, and when people say, oh, you look just like your mom, they're both just like, no, I don't. And they're just like, and they're disgusted by it. And they're,
Mhm.
like, it's like
Right.
I have a third eye. And, I think it's not really about that thing. It's about the deeper feeling of feeling that something's missing, or, because it's just that's such a surface thing, in my
Mhm.
opinion. Again, I think, as I said at the very top, and I like to say frequently, I have no credits to back up the things I'm saying, but they feel real to me. So I just say them really confidently,
Mhm.
and sometimes that
Mhm.
works. So,
Yeah, that's so interesting. And how does Mary feel? Because of course she doesn't look like the kids. And are there ever any discussions around that? Does that affect them at all? Or
well, there's like really just like funny things about, like, my daughter has a lot of Mary's mannerisms. Like, so Maxine will talk a lot about like how she'll be like, "Oh my god, I'm just like mommy in that I don't have any sense of direction," or like the two of them are both like, as soon as the TV's on, they just like stop talking or like staring at the TV. And, so they talk about their similarities, and Henry is very protective of Mary. And so it's like, I just think it's just like every other family in that regard. It's
just
like that
family
crossway
dynamics?
relationship. And it was the weirdest thing happened last night. Maxine was talking about how she did this thing where she, the phrase shits and giggles. She likes to say gets and shiggles. And I said, "Oh my God," I said, "Maxine," I said, "do you know that that was my dad's like favorite thing?" He called it balking tack words. And he would do it to waitresses. And he was a car salesman. So he was like, he had this like charming, like, funny guy
Mhm.
thing. And he would say all these phrases like flipped like that. And I was like, I was like, if my dad was alive right now, like, my head would be blown. We'd be calling him right now. Because it was just
Mhm.
like, when you're like, there was that movie that was about those triplets that were separated at birth at
Yes.
adoptions. And
Mhm.
they do that, the way that they script the movie, which I found so fascinating, is there's a whole act break where they're showing all these similarities of their behaviors.
Right.
And then they kind of tear the wall down, and they show how much of this could be things that they're doing because they want that connection, and because they are seeing the other person, or because they were doing media. And it was like, like, it's, you'll never know, like, is my daughter really directionally challenged, or is that a way that she's connecting to my wife? It's like,
Mhm.
it's all just like, I find it all really fascinating, the connections, because it's like there'll be posts in our Facebook groups where someone was like, "Hey, my kid is actually missing several grown-up teeth, like their incisors or whatever, like, and then someone else was like, "Oh my god, my kid had that too." And then someone else was like, "So did mine." So then we went to the dentist, and I was like, "Hey, this showed up in the donor group." And she was like, "Nope." She's like, "Your kid's got all the teeth." And I was like, "Okay, great." I was like, but it's like having people have conversations about health stuff and just all of these connections. Like, it's just, we're all connected in whatever level or way we're comfortable with or we want. And
Mm-hmm.
that's to me what we laid the playing field, or what we created for our kids is you can be as connected or not as connected. We will always love you. We are always here. Here's all the information we are able to give you. And there's always going to be questions. Like, both of my parents have passed away. There's so much of my family history that I will never, ever, ever know. And so much of it that it's like I found out from another relative, like maybe wasn't even true, and
Mm.
so I just feel like there's always going to be a longing or a missing part. And I don't know. I can't make too big of a deal of it. If my kid does, I'll respect that and I'll try to be helpful, but it's just it's not the ground that we're laying, if that makes sense.
Right, because you're living your life.
Yeah, we got things to do. I got a family. I'm busy. I got
Right.
17 jobs. But again, and only
Yes.
one of them pays. So,
It's so true. And, I think what's important and what's missing in a lot of these experiences for people who didn't know they were donor conceived and then grow up to have a lot of these issues is that, according to a lot of therapists, and particularly one who I'm writing about, Eric Erickson talks about the foundation of human development is trust, right? And if
mhm.
you start your life without trust in the family, if you're always feeling like somebody brings up a certain topic, and then as they're bringing up the topic they're feeling really strange around it, or you're getting a sense that they feel awkward talking about it, or there's whispering between the mother and the grandmother, or
Yes.
there are strange things happening around you, you develop a sense of not trusting your environment, right? You feel like there's something wrong, or if somebody's not fully accepting of you, if the parent sees you as not being part of them because they feel that they're donor conceived and they feel like they're not related to you. And it's the parent's issue because the parent doesn't feel connected enough and
Yeah.
they haven't done the work to get past that. And so the kid absorbs it, right? And so I think a lot of the things we're talking about are, really I mean, it sounds corny, but really just to give your children the love and the trust that they need, and to be as open with them as possible, and to be able to give them these opportunities to explore whatever's meaningful to them. And in spite of the fact that it might make us feel uncomfortable sometimes, we need to kind of put ourselves in their shoes and say, okay, what is it that they want? We can't
Yeah.
predetermine they're going to need X, Y, and Z because we don't know our kids yet. I mean, as they develop, we get to know them, and they change so much as they get
Oh
older,
my
right?
God, so much.
It's amazing, right? And I think for a lot of people out there, when you're starting your journey, you don't really realize that, but your kids start with a certain temperament, and then that changes over time. I know with my daughter, when we first started doing these tip top workshops, my oldest daughter hated it, and she kept on thinking, this is the worst thing ever, and I can't believe you're making me do this, mom, and it's terrible. And we did it every summer, and I think in like summer 8 or summer 7, I went into her room and she was looking at the materials.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
never know, right?
Yeah.
You just never know that at some point they're not going to change their ideas about wanting to find their donor or wanting more information or whatever. And so we just need to lay it all out there and support them in their growth, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there can't be any shame. Like,
Yeah.
it just has to be. I mean, it's like I know a few people, or I've also heard stories of people who maybe used egg donors and didn't tell their kids. And I'm always like, oh, dear God, this is just going to blow up in your face.
Yeah.
It's like you mentioned that there was a lot of like hullabaloo with the donor conceived networks, and there was like a lot of like looking for reform. And, when we got in there and had some conversations with them, and I found that a lot of the people that were very upset were people who had been lied to, or
Yeah.
people who didn't have all their information. And I'm not saying that everything is going to be perfect and hunky dory with my kids because of the honesty, but I certainly think we have a much better chance
Yes.
of it going well, and of them feeling like whole and complete. Like, this is my
Mm-hmm.
family, and this is, like, and so far my kids are landing, knock wood, are landing where your kids are. Like, does a fish know it's in water? And that's great. They're far
Yeah.
more annoyed with me for, my propensity to be very strict, or, they're
Right.
far more annoyed with my parenting style than they are the fact that they don't have a dad. It doesn't mean that, especially for my son, he's even our cat's a girl. It's like he's in an all female house, and, and he's got a lot of feelings, he's got a lot of emotions. And so I try to I try to keep him in places where there's strong men, like he's in sports, where there's strong coaches, and I try to like foster and facilitate relationships with other men in my life that I love that are like good dads. And, he just went and spent a weekend with one of my friends from college. Like, he has 3 sons and his wife is one of my best friends, and they did like a boys weekend. So it's like, we're just doing
Hmm.
the best we can,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what, there are moments that break your heart. Like him and I were on a walk one morning, and he said, I don't know, somehow it was like we were like in the neighborhood of talking about puberty, and he said something like, "Well, he's like, I can really get everything I need off of YouTube." And I was like, "Oh dear God, please no." I was like, "I don't think you should be getting." So we were talking
Mm-hmm.
about who's going to teach
Mm-hmm.
him to shave. I think that's what we were
Yeah.
talking about. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
we're just really honest and open, and that's part of how I approach all of parenting. And mostly, like, not mostly, that sounded bad, but all of my life is like, I'm a very open communicator. I try to share where I'm coming from. I try to clean up my mistakes, and I try to do those same things as a parent. And again, like, just like every other thing in parenting, like, I'm far more daunted now. And that's why I think that, to the point that about my daughter being a teen, let me say that I'm far more daunted now about my daughter being a teen. But that's part of that point that I was making earlier that I'm not sure I ever really finished, is like, I understand how bunged up you can get during the process of choosing a donor and how you want to make your family. And even if you're a straight couple who's struggling to get pregnant, like, how that can just feel like the weight of the world. And like, it's never, but good Lord, it's just the beginning. It is just the beginning for how hard the journey of parenting is.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I'm very committed to talking about, because I think not enough people talk about how hard parenting is and how much support you need. And it's okay to be like, my kid was being a jerk today, or
Mm-hmm.
my kid's struggling and I'm frustrated. And, it's like, I feel like we're all trying to, like, it's great. It's the most lovely, rewarding thing I've ever done. And sure, it is that. But it is also the fucking, sorry if I'm not allowed to swear, hardest thing I've ever done. And
Yes.
the most challenging thing, and the thing that pushes me to my growth edge. So like, if you can't hang in there with like the donor process and the like, you're in for some trouble, because parenting's tough. It'll push you. Can you
It
tell I'm having a
definitely
tough time,
it
Lisa?
definitely pushes you. It's true. It's so true. Yeah. And people look forward to that, right? They say, "Let me bring it on," right? I'm looking forward to
Can't wait.
being so stressed out about like my kids, because I just want to be a parent so badly, and it's so hard to go through fertility treatment, and a
And
lot
it
of
is. I
it's
don't mean to
not
minimize
covered.
that, but yes.
Yeah, and it's still, even though ASRM has changed their designation for fertility now this year, which is great, it's still, unfortunately, pretty discriminatory, right? We
Mm.
just had somebody on the podcast who had to go to Africa to find a surrogate because he couldn't afford a surrogate in the US.
Yeah.
And that's scary, right? I mean, there's no
Frightening.
And in Africa. You just don't know what's going
The
on
legal
there. And
protections you may not
legal
have. Yeah.
protections, and right, and what's going on with the surrogate, is she being treated well or not, and he doesn't even know where his donor comes from. So there is still a lot of discrimination, a lot of other issues that we're kind of battling into trying
Absolutely.
to have more equality in family building, certainly. But we do see, in terms of the disclosure issues, that the two problems that people have most are when either there's late disclosure or
Mhm.
accidental disclosure, right?
Yes.
And those things can be so damaging for the children.
On some levels, we're just super lucky that we're 2 women, because
Mhm.
you can't hide it. Like, it happened real early, and way earlier than I thought. It was like, as soon as we went to daycare, my daughter started being like, I wrote an article about this on Medium, it was featured on Medium, called "Where's My Daddy?" Because like, as soon as we
Oh.
took her to daycare, she started being like, "Yep, my daddy picks me up." And we were just like, "No, remember, you have 2 moms, and some people have a grandma and a grandpa, and some people," she was like, "Nope, my daddy's downstairs in the basement." And then at first we were like, "What's happening in the basement?" And then, and then we were like, she was like almost walking up to strangers on the street and being like, "That's my daddy." And we were like, "Oh my God, no." It's like, and we had to like really bump up. And that's when when we went out and bought a book that was like two moms with a sperm donor. And it was like, and we read it whenever she would do that, we would read it every night for like a few
To explain
weeks.
it.
Yeah. And then
Mhm.
if she asked any questions, we would. And then as she got older, we just kept adding to it. And we'd be like, oh, see, like that donor, you and Henry have different donors. And so that's how we would just we would use the book to drop things in. It was facilitated by her noticing our family wasn't the same. So if you're a heterosexual presenting couple and you used a donor egg or a sperm donor, you can get away with not sharing that information. But to anyone who's listening, that if you are in that camp and you are thinking about that, I implore you not to do that, to make it part of the story right out of the get-go, because it'll never, like you said, accidental happens all the time.
Yeah.
It's like all they have to do is go to the hospital and get their blood drawn and then have it not match. And it's gonna, and with 23 and me, ooh, like I've had a couple of new aunts like an aunt and I think an uncle that popped out of the woodwork from I guess great aunts from like my dad's sister. I mean, they're all dead, so I'm spilling the Hopkins family tea, but like had some kids on the farm in upstate New York, and like people showed up on the 23andMe and reached out to my sister, like, "Hey, we're related." And we were like,
Right.
"Ooh!" And there had been family lore about it. It was like back in the day, like someone got sent away for a couple of months. That was like I think how they handled things like that,
Yes, that's how they handled it.
right? It was just
Yes.
like
Yeah.
they're away for a semester, so
Yeah.
so it's like it's gonna come out. It is so like just handle the message before. It's like politics almost. Like
Right,
that's the
right,
worst
and it
metaphor
goes back
ever.
to that, like well, it does go back to that sense of trust, like, if you
Yeah.
can trust your parents, if you feel like there's not a secret in the house, if you don't feel like something's being held from you, it does change a relationship, right? It
100%.
makes a relationship so different. Once you can trust somebody, your shoulders drop, you feel even as an adult, you can sense just a whole different feeling with somebody if
Yeah.
you feel trusting of them. And children need that most to feel safe in the world, right? And develop
Mhm.
psychological stability and all sorts of other things. So,
Well, and reading the book to my kids forced me to confront any shame or internal conversation that I was having about it. Because it's like the
yeah,
first couple times we read it, I was uncomfortable. And I was like,
yes,
oh, like I was like, what words is she going to take from this book and take into school? Is she going to be like at daycare talking about sperm and eggs and her two moms? And it's like it like in the reading, I got more comfortable with it. So
yes,
it allows healing for you for whatever you may
yes,
need. And it also is setting your kid up to be, like you said, trusting and informed and allowing them like I feel like my only job as a parent is I don't want kids that come back and live with me. I want to love them and I want to hang out with them and I want them to like me and I want them to be good people, but I want them to go and have amazing lives. Like I
mm-hmm,
just want them to like
launch,
yeah, I like that's my job. My job is
mm-hmm,
to like set you up so that you question like I don't want you to question me right now, which is the hard part. Is
mm-hmm.
like I'm setting up these kids that to be questioners of the way things go and then when they question me I'm all like, "Hey, not now."
Right,
That's that,
right, right,
but it's like I want them to be strongly opinionated people who care about other people, who are empathetic and walk out into the world and build a goddamn good life. Like and
yeah.
like this is all part of that. Like I have to give them everything they need and that's the information to be secure in who they are and where they come from. That's part of it.
Absolutely, Robin. 100%. Well, I think that was beautifully said, and I think that's a good note to wrap up on. That was so beautiful. I think that's absolutely true. I hope everybody takes that to heart because it's so important. Ultimately, in decades from now, after your children have launched, that's what you're going to want most, right? Them to feel secure in themselves when they go out into the world. And this is a great place to start with the honesty and a good story. And as Robin's saying, to be able to even talk about it yourself so you could get the kinks out yourself in the story. So I think that's great. Well, thank you so much, Robin, for coming on today. Really, really appreciate it. And for all of you out there, I'd like to share Robin's information so that you can connect with her. How do we find you, Robin?
Yeah, I'm at Real Rob Hops. Let's Real Rob Hops on all the social platforms. That's probably the best place to get me. And also, you can follow my Substack. Shit I learned from my crappy childhood. And I think it's like Robin Hopkins donor-sibling.substack.com, but whatever, search me, you'll find me there. I got any of my musings. I would love to have you on the journey with me.
And your podcast?
Oh yeah. Well adjusting. Well adjusting is the podcast. Adjusting. That's the podcast. Come check that out too. We got a new season coming out March 19th.
Oh, great. Okay, terrific. So everyone take a look and subscribe, and certainly subscribe here as well.
Yes.
I get a lot of emails from people who say that they love the podcast and they listen to it a lot, but they don't press that subscribe button. So please do that. It really means a lot. And definitely come back next time for more wonderful stories. We'd love to have you. Hi, it's Lisa Schumann. I hope that you enjoyed that video and I hope it helped you. And if it did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe because that's how we keep going. It's really important to us. And if you liked it, you might like this one.